Hey, how's it going? It's Nick here, and this week I'm going to be working on a reductive lino cut. And so I have this sandwich here. My mom made it for me, and it got me thinking a little bit how cooking and printmaking are kind of related, and the kind of time and care that my mom puts into cooking is pretty similar to the time and care I put into printmaking. And so I thought I'd make a little print just kind of reflecting upon those similarities. And so this print starts off with an iron oxide transfer from a photo that I did. I just kind of transferred the boundaries of where I thought the lines would be, and then I traced it all in Sharpie, and I wiped away all the iron oxide transfer because I knew it was just going to get washed away anyway. And then I'm going to stain my block with a little bit of red paint just so I can kind of differentiate what I've carved and what I haven't carved yet. And then I'm going to take my block outside and give it a generous coat of this spray fixative, and that's going to prevent the Sharpie from transferring from my block onto my paper. It also helps ensure that my drawing doesn't go away when I'm cleaning my prints in between each round. After it's had a while to dry out off the side, because man it smells bad, I'm just going to take it inside and get started carving. And so I know reduction printing seems like a complicated process, especially if you've never done it before, but you just take it one step at a time, and it all just works out and you have fun in the end. It's just like when I tell people that they need to read One Piece. It seems very intimidating and imposing, and it's going to take like a long time, but you take it one step at a time and you enjoy yourself along the way, and it ends up being a very fulfilling and rewarding experience. And so for this print, basically reduction printing, you just carve away whatever you want to kind of remain as the last layer. And so since the paper is white, that was my last layer, I'm going to carve away anything that I want to stay white. And so here it's just going to be kind of like this little slivers of white of the inside of the bread loaf just kind of peeking out. I don't know how many of you noticed, or if it's too fast to be going to notice, but for some reason the left index finger on the kind of like the before knuckle or the after knuckle, it doesn't have any hair. I don't know. All my other fingers kind of have hair there, but not that one for some reason. Well, damn, you can't see it in the shot. I guess you're just gonna have to rewind and check it out. So in terms of paper, I have this handmade paper that I made a long time ago. It's made from recycled prints, and it has these little flecks of gold mica in it that I think are really cool. And so I thought handmade paper with a handmade sandwich, that's pretty neat. And so I'm just gonna take this. They're 16 by 20. I'm gonna go ahead and tear them in half, and then I'm just gonna reinforce this area that I'm about to punch with holes with some masking tape, because this paper falls apart quite easily. And so I want to punch some holes, and so these holes will help me put the prints in the same spot relative to the block every time. And with my paper and the registration taken care of, let's go ahead and mix some ink. And so I want a really light tan brown for this first layer. And so I'm going to take some sepia, a lot of white, and I'm going to transparentize it a little bit, just because I kind of want a little bit of that paper kind of, the flecks and the sparkles showing through. So it was a good consistency before I added the transparent base. That Hawthorne opaque white had a really nice stiff body to it, but the transparent base loosened it up a little bit more than I'd like. So I'm going to add a little bit of magnesium carbonate just to kind of stiffen it back up. And then of course I'm going to add a little bit of dryer to speed up this whole process. In retrospect, I should have added a lot more dryer. Yeah, so one of the selling points of the Hawthorne ink is that it takes like 2 years for it to skin over in the pot. And so I should have put 2 and 2 together. It means that it takes a long time to dry. So I didn't add a ton of dryer. That's about how much dryer I'd add for like Gamblin inks, because that dries already pretty fast. But these prints took like a week to dry. And so I'm going to go ahead and roll up my block over here, and we're going to print our first layer. And you might have noticed that time to print on this print is really fast, and we're only 4 minutes in this video, and that's how reduction prints go. You start hitting the ground faster than you think, and it really does go by pretty quickly. And so here I've just kind of got my little L jig with some registration pins on it. I'm going to hook on my paper, and then I'm just going to kind of line those two up, and then I'm going to go ahead and drop on that sheet of paper and give it a nice little pat on the back to make sure that the ink kind of has a nice firm grab on it. And then I'm going to take out my registration pins, because it would be very bad if I ran those through the press. Felts down, and then I'm going to run it through. and it printed surprisingly clean. I don't usually use this handmade paper for actually printing on it. I mostly use it for book covers, but I was surprised about how consistent the print was and how, not glossy the ink was. It was nice and matte. And after doing that 12 more times, I had to clean off the block and everything else, and then I got to go back to carving. So now I'm going to carve away anything I want to say this light tan area. So it's going to be a lot of sections up here, kind of like finishing out the whiteness of this loaf here, and I'm going to do a little bit here on the edges of the meat. And so I'm going to start with the big U-gouge and just really clear out these areas. And then after that, I'm going to come back in with the V-gouge and just kind of fade in these areas. It's kind of like giving someone a haircut, at least like a men's fade haircut. And now that I think about it, maybe that's why I had such good luck cutting men's hair when I first started trying to. I started cutting hair for some friends in grad school because my mom wasn't around to cut my hair anymore, and so other people also needed their hair cut, and so I invested into a hair clipping set and kind of started giving haircuts to a lot of the other grads. And so maybe these skills transferred over. It's kind of a subtlety to detail, fading things, tapering lines, the subtle gradients. Maybe it's just all printmaking. All of life is just related to printmaking. Everything's a process. It's unescapable. I can never get printmaking out of my head. And I never really owned like a proper pair of hair cutting scissors, but I did know how to sharpen tools. And so what I had was this pair of like kitchen like cutting scissors, and then I just kind of sharpened them like extremely sharp, and I always used those to cut people's hairs whenever I had to cut girls' hairs. And you know what? I didn't hear any complaints. It was surprisingly sharp, and the kitchen scissors had a really good length to them, and so it kind of really helped kind of layer hair. You just get a really long, nice, straight, clean cut, or you can angle it and get like a really nice taper to it. Anyway, if you see me in person and you need a haircut, I'm always there to give you free haircuts if you trust me and my kitchen scissors. So now that this layer is done carving, I'm going to go ahead and recycle that leftover ink from my first round. I find that this is a good way to kind of keep your colors in the same kind of color family and make it really cohesive. And I'm going to add a little bit of this yellow ochre to it to kind of give it a nice warmth and darken it out a little bit. And I'm going to add some mag carb to this ink to stiffen it up. I find that when I print wet ink on wet ink, which means that I don't let the last layer dry completely before printing the next one, that stiff ink likes to sit on top of loose ink, but not the other way around. So if my ink's too loose, I find that it kind of squishes out and you get this weird little flower petal pattern to your ink, which is not good. And so I'm going to ink up my block. And side tangent, I just found out that yellow ochre is a mineral. I don't know, for the longest time I thought that yellow ochre was like a plant-based pigment, probably because it had oak in it, and so I just kind of associated it with trees and plants. Longest time, that's what I thought. I just found out that it's a mineral and some clay. Yeah, you learn something new every day. Anyway, here's what it looks like with the second layer on it, and it's a very subtle difference, but I think those little subtleties is what really makes an artwork kind of fun. And so, on to the next layer. And I'm going to dedicate this layer to the darker tones of the bread. And so for this layer, I'm going to carve away a lot of the more like, normal lighter bread tones. And so from all of this, I'm going to clear out, and I'm going to go ahead and clear out the rest of this kind of meat color that's in here, and just leave a few little pieces just for kind of these crinkles in the bread. And you're going to notice a trend where the carving just kind of gets faster and faster as there's less to carve each time. And so I have all of this carving at the same 3000 speed, and so this carving footage is sped up 30 times. And I really hope you all enjoy watching me carve more than you watch me print, because I feel like with printing it's the exact same process but with different colors, whereas carving, I don't know, it's a little bit more satisfying to watch. But if that isn't the case, boy, I got some bad news for you, because this video is going to be like 90% carving and like 10% printing. And so just like the last layer, I'm going to use my U-gouge to clear out the big areas, and then I'm going to come back in with my V-gouge and just kind of give a nice little texture. And that's why I love the V-gouge. You can just get such a nice, fun kind of hatching texture to it and a nice variety of lines. as opposed to U-gouges that just give you kind of one uniform line. I actually only ever use like 3 of the gouges in my like 7 gouge set that I have. Pretty much just the V-gouge, this deep U-gouge, and then like the ultra like wide shallow U-gouge for clearing out big spaces. Like the shallow U-gouges that are small, man, I have like never touched those things. And my tiny V-gouge, man, I've used that thing so many times over the past like 6 or 7 years, that V-gouge is actually magnetized now, and so it'll stick to other metal objects. Kind of crazy. And once I clear out all of this kind of space up here for the bread, I just kind of go in with some more shallow cuts to make sure that it doesn't have any chatter in it. And then I'm going to clear out the rest of the color for this kind of meat layer. And then that was probably like, this is like half of the blocks, just kind of a surface area just gone. And so from here, it's just going to be very small minor tweaks. In retrospect, I probably could have done with a few more layers. It didn't really take that much longer, especially since I'm printing wet on wet. I really could have done more layers, and it would have helped me kind of build out a more full value scale, something I'd probably come later to regret. The downsides to not planning all your colors out beforehand, but once this was all cleared out, it was time to mix out some more ink. And so I'm going to take that pre-existing ink from earlier, and again I'm just going to kind of darken it to kind of keep that cohesion. And I was going for like a toasted bread kind of color, but I ended up with this very peanut butter-esque color. And you know, now that I think about it, both of those things are pretty similar colors. It's almost like they were meant for each other. I actually don't really like peanut butter that much. I feel like, while yes, I enjoy really sweet stuff, it's kind of dry. Like, it just kind of sticks to the roof of your mouth, and I just don't like the texture of it. And it's too thick, too dry. Not for me. And looking at this print, yeah, it's kind of peanut buttery at this point. Bread and peanut buttery. But by far the worst peanut butter thing I've ever had is the peanut butter milkshake at Sonic's. Oh boy, was that just kind of a terrible time. And so for the next layer, I'm going to go ahead and clear out all of the bread and the rest of this kind of tan color. And the next layer I'm going to do for this orangish color down here. Anyway, back to the Sonic peanut butter milkshake. I ain't done ranting about that one yet. And that drink, I mean, it was already thick because it was a Sonic's milkshake. And I got a really big cup of it because this is in the summer when Sonic does their like after 8 p.m. Half off milkshake kind of deal. So I got the largest size because it was only like 40 cents more or whatever. And this drink, let me tell you, it was like so dry. It was almost like drinking straight peanut butter out of the straw. And you know how like peanut butter is kind of dry? I could feel it sucking the moisture out of my mouth and my body with every sip. It was the most like dehydrating liquid I have like ever drank. Not to mention, if you drink like a whole large Sonic's milkshake, you're not gonna have fun on its way back out. And so, terrible experience overall. I would not recommend the peanut butter milkshake at Sonic's. So anyway, for this layer, I switched back to Gamblin white ink because I want this print to dry within a reasonable amount of time. I need this layer to dry because I'm going to switch from a red and orangish kind of color to a green color after this, and so I don't want those colors to kind of bleed into each other. And so I'm going to let this orange and red layer completely dry before I start the green layer. That way, you know, it's not going to turn into like a brown mess. And so the first part of this is going to be kind of like that cucumbers, just kind of you know, near white, just kind of slightly tinged greenish kind of area. And you know, there's no avoiding, you know, the colors are going to mix a little bit, which is also like the main beauty of reduction printing. Your colors mixing a little bit is the main helping hand for achieving cohesiveness in, you know, a very colorful print. And it's around here where I have such little surface area for all of my ink, where I have to really be careful about not letting my paper shift. With the earlier layers, there's so much surface area in the print, and that tacky ink just kind of holds that paper in place as it goes through the press. But now I have to make sure I keep a hand on the print as it goes through the press until it catches with the pressure rollers to make sure that it doesn't shift. And now I'm going to clear out all this light green area, and then the next layer is going to be this kind of a darker green. And so I'm going to use my V-gouge and just kind of clear out a lot of this area up here, and then I'm going to kind of give it a little bit of texture just so it's not a uniform kind of green. And then over here I'm just going to kind of start to form that roundness to the cilantro leaves, and just kind of let those cilantro leaves have a little bit of highlights in them. And I'm going to add a little bit more green to my pre-existing green that I used for the last layer. And then we're going to print this layer. And then not much to talk about here. This one's just kind of a mid layer in between layers. It's starting to come along real nicely. So here I'm just going to kind of clear out most of the just kind of the cilantro leaves and just kind of leave like a really dark green layer. And for this part of the print, I didn't like how smooth it came out at first. It's just kind of this uniform green layer, and so I lessened the pressure, and so it's only kind of like spotty printing. It's a very salty print, but I think it gives it a nice texture to this kind of dark green layer, a bit closer to kind of like that texture that the leaves might have. But unfortunately I don't show it to the camera for very long, so grab it with your eyes real quick. And I wasn't quite satisfied with this green layer. I thought it should have one more, and so I added one more reduction to this green leaves. And for the color, I'm just gonna add a little bit of the orange just to kind of neutralize it even some more, you know, just kind of make it more of a brownish kind of color. And again, for this one, I'm going to print it with kind of a light pressure. That way it becomes a sort of staticky looking sort of textured print. And at this point, I wasn't quite sure of it because, man, that dark green is by far the darkest thing on this print. And I thought my kind of value scale was going to be a bit off. I was getting really worried. And so I decided to do the gold layer, just kind of one golden, I don't know, piece of cilantro. And so for the gold layer, I'm going to use this Hawthorne medium gold, and I'm going to mix 1 spoonful of the pigment and then 1 heaping spoonful of the varnish. And I really like the opacity and the kind of color of the Hawthorne gold inks. It's just a bit of a hassle to, 1, order it, and 2, just mix it up before you printed it. But I think it's well worth it in this scenario, and you know, the printing area is not that big. I don't need that much ink. And at this point, I could smell the final stretch. I was so happy with this print. I think that gold really did a lot to kind of knock back some of that really dark green. And I was extremely pleasantly surprised by how reflective this gold was. Like, it really looked like gold foil, you know, on my print. So couldn't be happier. It was a great time for me. And the original plan was to carve out most of the golden cilantro and just leave a few little lines to give it a sort of texture and distinction. But in the end, I feel like it looked a little too out of place because the entire piece had this sort of reductive style to it. And then now all of a sudden I'm adding this line work back into it. It was just a weird random bit of line work that I didn't quite like. And so I ended up just clearing out all of the lines from the cilantro and just printing the background in this layer. And I went through a few different ideas for the background. First, I was going to print with this sepia color because it's a really nice, warm, dark brown that I enjoyed. But this ended up being a little too transparent. And so after that, I went for a more black color. You know, maybe I'll make it kind of, you know, glow and pop from the background. And I know that black is very opaque. But I feel like it was a little bit too dark because of the value scale. Most of the sandwich just kind of hovers around the, you know, top, you know, 0 to like 30% lightness, and then it jumps all the way down to like 100% black. It was too jarring of a jump. And so after that, I tried a sort of, you know, dark purple / brown, kind of mixing these inks together, and I was hoping that the purple was going to contrast the yellows in the bread to make it pop even more, but I didn't quite like this one either. Again, too much contrast. And after a short mental breakdown because my print wasn't going so well, I finally landed on this kind of light blue purple to kind of adding a little bit of gold to it, the darker purple, and it's got a lot of white to it. And so this ink is pretty mid-tones in relative of how dark this purple was before I added white to it, but it's dark compared to the rest of the banh mi in this print, and so it kind of acts like a sort of dark background popping forward the bread. But because of the white that I added to it, it ended up being really opaque and kind of covering up the little bit of ink that was showing up at the bottom. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It was an incredible joy to just make a print for fun, not thinking about it too hard. I would recommend you should go out and do your own reductive lino cut. One of my favorite things in the world. I've forgotten how much fun it was, and so I think I'm going to do a few more reductive lino cuts in the future and do a little mini series with them because I enjoyed it that much. And so get subscribed if you're looking forward to that. And also next week I should be dropping the how to make this octagonal canister form over here. I've been teasing this to death for like the past month now, but I think I'm going to finally drop that next week because I'm going to be out of town, but I've got it all recorded. So if you liked this video or you found it helpful, leave a like, that'll really help me out, and I'll see you next week.